Welcome to another edition of Who's Better Baseball with a very happy host here. I'm Ryan Finkelstein, manager editor for justbaseball.com. I have Patrick Lyons with me today, host of our Rockies Insider podcast, and we're going to talk about the wild card round. But before we get into the wild card round, there was, I don't know what you call today, a game 161, 162 that felt like the old game 163s, where there was a doubleheader where the result that we all expected happened. It was a split. The Mets and the Braves are both going to make the playoffs here, or they both just did make the playoffs. The Diamondbacks are out. But that first game was box office. That felt like a playoff game. It felt like October arrived a day early with what we saw in game one.
I think MLB just got a taste of why the Mets could be a serious threat this October, because you can't kill them. Even when you do, they are not dead yet. They will keep coming back. They will keep fighting, and they are led by one of the biggest fighters and one of the biggest leaders that we've seen in 2024. Despite the fact that he may not win MVP, his case did get a little bit stronger on not even the final day of the regular season, the final day of the regular season plus one. Game 161. I like the branding of that because it's confusing, and only if you know, you know. So game 61, game 161. That's how we should refer to it.
You know, I think we can revisit at some point the whole Ohtani Lindor thing. And I obviously was the biggest advocate for Francisco Lindor to be the MVP this year. When I made the argument, when I wrote the article, I did sort of leave a little wiggle room and say, look, Shohei Ohtani can win this thing in September. When I originally talked about it, we were looking at Ohtani coming off in August where he hit like low 200s, on base percentage below 300. It wasn't a great August. Shohei Ohtani put together the most remarkable September you're ever going to find to ensure that he is going to be a unanimous MVP. I don't even think a New York beat writer is going to vote for Lindor over Ohtani because Ohtani has earned that. But what Francisco Lindor proved today is he put together an MVP caliber season. And the last two games, okay, on Sunday, the Mets needed to win to beat the Brewers to make it a situation where they only had to get one. He starts out the game, he draws a walk, he steals second on the first pitch. It's the first time we've seen him run since he hurt his back. Sort of set the tone for his team. He scores the first run of that game, gets another hit in that game, hits a home run in that game. So does it all. And then today, same thing. You see him come through, get a big RBI hit in an inning where the Mets score 6 runs after they knock Spencer Schwellenbach out of the game finally in the 8th inning. Schwellenbach looked unbelievable early on, 7 scoreless to start the game. Lindor is part of a 6-run rally. Brandon Nimmo caps it with a 2-run homer. Edwin Diaz blows it. The Braves come right on back, score 4 runs, make it 7-6. But Lindor gets another crack at it, hits a 2-run homer to put the Mets up. And Diaz held on in the 9th after blowing it in the 8th. Man, I'll tell you what, as a Mets fan, that's going to go down as one of the best games the Mets have ever played in my lifetime, where I'll put that right towards the top of the list, outside of maybe a playoff game. But again, really felt like a playoff game.
It had the same ups and downs, certainly not the same weight because it's not the World Series. But Game 6 of the 1986 World Series, where you're trailing and then all of a sudden you end up winning, but then you've got more business to do. I think a lot of people don't know that when that ball went under Bill Buckner's legs, that wasn't the end of the World Series. There's still one more game that had to be played, and there's still now 13 more games that the Mets have to win in order to secure a World Series. Nevertheless, you're right. That was one of the best and biggest wins in a lot of Mets fans' lives, with the season on the line like that in enemy territory in Atlanta, and getting it done in that kind of fashion is just remarkable, memorable to say the least.
Yeah, and I think when you watch the second game play out, the narrative surrounding the Mets would have been completely different going into this wild card round. Because you sort of saw that we knew the second game wasn't going to matter for whoever won the first one. If those of you didn't know the stakes, Mets and Braves entered the day. Each of them won one game. They were in. The Diamondbacks were out. The Diamondbacks needed one of these teams to sweep. And by winning the first game, you saw the Mets didn't really put the pedal to the metal, obviously, to try to get the Braves out. At the end of the game, Brandon Nimmo's not running out. Brandon Nimmo, mind you, the guy who sprints out walks, is jogging down the first base line so the Mets don't have to pitch in the bottom of the 9th inning. They weren't trying at the end of that game because they had bigger things to plan for. If the Mets had won that second game instead of the first one, and let's say Lindor never hits the home run, they lose 7-6. For one, I think the pressure would have been a lot more, or it might have gotten to the Mets more than it got to the Braves to win that second game. I could have seen that. But also, if the Mets had won a game like that, everyone would be like, well, they just kind of backed in. Now I think the Mets go into this playoff run with a little more momentum because they won the game that both of these teams were desperate to get.
They won the game that both teams wanted to win. It's not to
Mm-hmm.
say the Mets didn't want to win game two, but they didn't need to. So it was a different dynamic. Like you said, they won the game in which both teams decidedly needed to win. And then when the Braves didn't win, they needed to win the next game. But the Mets only needed to win that first one. And you're right, they could take their foot off the pedal. So you're right. I like that narrative a little bit more. They do now have to go to Milwaukee. We'll get to that series preview after having a rough weekend up in Wisconsin. Just coming off the heels of that, nearly got swept. Nevertheless, you're right. I think they won the better game to give them that momentum. The same would have been true if Atlanta had won that first game. You're right. And then maybe the Mets end up coming away with a 3-0 victory and feeling good about it, but still not winning that do or die game that was game one on Monday.
Yeah, I think it does really help them. And we'll talk about Mets Brewers, but I actually want to talk about the game two. They got the Braves in and use that as a springboard into our preview of Braves Padres because I think going into the day, you would have thought, man, Braves Padres could be a great series. If the Braves win game one, it's going to be Chris Sale and Max Fried going game 1 and 2. Fortunately, if they lose the first game, Chris Sale might have to pitch the Braves into the playoffs. Turns out Chris Sale was not only not available for that game, dealing with back spasms, Brian Snitker made it seem like he's not even going to be on the roster potentially. It seems like Chris Sale is out. Could he come back at a later date if the Braves make a run? Yes. But as we talk about this preview, I think the Padres are sitting really pretty here because Max Fried's going game 2. The Braves got a good shot at that one if Fried goes on regular rest. I don't know who pitches game 1. Is it a bullpen game? The Padres are all lined up. If what I'm looking at MLB.com is true, they got Michael King, Joe Musgrove, and Dylan Cease lined up to pitch in this series. And the only starter that the Braves have that is rested and ready is Fried. Schwellenbach went today, 7 plus. Ronaldo Lopez pitched out of the bullpen today after pitching on Saturday. So I don't know how available he's going to be. Morton pitched on Sunday. Like, I don't know who's starting these games for the Braves. Are they going to be able to pull this off, to pull off an upset like this in San Diego when the Padres just been sitting there waiting for them?
I think anything is possible. Like when we get to the postseason, we are still in a world in which any team can win. Because you're right, if they can manage to get past the Padres, because it's a small sample size, it's a best of 3. All you got to do is be good for 36 hours, 48 hours, and you move on to the next round, and then you can resort some things a little bit in the division series. That being said, I definitely like the odds of the Padres a lot better. Their home record was just fine, 9 games over 500, 45 and 36. But anyone who's experienced Petco Park for a big game, it's not a fortress, but it is an atmosphere that's unlike a lot of other places. I've said this before on the pod. I was there at the trade deadline in 2022 when they got Brandon Drury, Josh Bell, Josh Hader, and Juan Soto, and that place was as loud as Game 7 of a World Series. And that was just the regular season. So with these games meaning what they do, having home field advantage for all 3 of the wild card round games, you're right. Everything is probably leaning in the Padres' corner, maybe even more so than any of the other wild card round games.
Yeah, I think so. I look at, and it's crazy to say, but I look at, like, and we'll get to it, but just a comparison, you would think Houston Astros, the team that has made 7 straight ALCSs going up against an upstart in the Tigers, that's a huge, like, David versus Goliath story. The Tigers got Tarek Skubal, though, going game 1, and they got a rested staff. The Braves just played 18 innings. And, I mean, Razel Iglesias pitched in both games. Joe Jimenez pitched in both games. Grant Holmes, who probably would be one of those candidates to potentially start with your guys down, he got pushed in this, do or die game 2 to get them there. So the Braves had to exhaust so much just to get in. And the Padres, they've been, I mean, the best team in the National League for a couple months now as well. And I just think about for one, the starting pitching the Padres have, but also the bullpen that's rested. Like they have everything they need. To me, at this point, it's more going to be an indictment to the Padres if they drop the ball here and don't win. I mean, obviously, it'll be a credit to the Braves for just being this resilient team. Talk about a cockroach. If the Braves make it out of the next round, they're the cockroach of this season because of all the injuries they've gone through. But man, what a massive disappointment that would be in San Diego, because this is a team that should have their eyes on the Dodgers in the next round already, thinking, all right, we got a chance to take down Big Brother. And if they don't get there, again, that's going to be a huge upset.
And that could be where Atlanta is able to fit in because, you're worried more about the next round than you are about this one. And you've got all your eggs, in theory, in one basket in a guy like Dylan Cease going in game 3, which is the final game of the 3-game series between these two clubs. And you say, well, if you needed to, if Atlanta ends up winning game 1 on Tuesday, maybe you do end up shifting Dylan Cease up to game 2 because that becomes a must-win game now for the Padres. That's how quickly things can spiral out of control. If the Atlanta can go and just sneak out a win, maybe 2-1, managing in some kind of bullpen game on fumes, all of a sudden the pressure now is placed upon San Diego. And then now maybe Mike Schilt has to reshuffle some things a little bit. Again, they've got the roster where they can do that and manage it. You still like the odds for San Diego to do that. But nevertheless, we've seen how teams that have to play in the wild card round have been better in the division series against the teams that get a bye. I don't think that's necessarily true for a team like the Padres who got a single day off, whereas Atlanta had to stay hot and had to keep playing. Nevertheless, if something like that happens, you go, well, yeah, that also does make sense. That's just simply why I don't think you can rule anybody out of the postseason, out of any series, and virtually out of any moment. At 3-0, if you're down 3-0, again, that's one thing, but we have seen it happen once. The 2004 Boston Red Sox against the New York Yankees, the evil empire. But even still, as we get in the comment here live on YouTube, you just can't rule out anybody, especially in these short 3-game series.
It's interesting because I'm looking at these matchups again. It's funny. Mike Schilt's comment on how they picked their starters. He said, quote, "We picked them out of a hat." Joking, obviously, but I do wonder if there was a little bit of gamesmanship when you think about the lineup, because I was a little surprised. Okay, Michael King's been great, but he's going before Dylan Cease, and they're holding Dylan Cease for an elimination game. Are they thinking about that as, all right, let's have Cease pitch an elimination game, or is it, the team that's coming in, because they were pretty much set up where there's a good chance, all right, the team that's coming in, maybe a little tired, we're going to win game 1. We're going to win game 2. And now Dylan Cease got him saved for Jack Flaherty, game 1 of the NLDS. I think they're probably thinking a little bit ahead. I really kind of feel like these matchups sort of indicate they are.
Bingo. It's bulletin board material, and that can be fodder, and it also can be a little bit of a momentum giver to the team that needs that. And you're right. And Atlanta is aware of that. Atlanta knows that and says, okay, look, that's what you think of us. Okay, we're going to go out there and prove it. Again, it's just a best of 3 series. Anything can happen with something like that. And with baseball, it can be that kind of a crapshoot. So you're right. Is San Diego thinking about LA too much? Could be, because if they take their eye off the prize, again, in 36 to 48 hours, their season can absolutely be over, right? Matt Olson gets hot at the right time. Michael Harris the second. Ozzie Albies, as we saw in game 1 with a 5 RBI game. Like, the bats are there in Atlanta, and they are tried and true when it comes to the postseason. You can't necessarily say the same about everybody in that San Diego lineup. They did it for one postseason, not all the way through. They got to the NLCS in 2022, but that's been some time since then, and they don't have all that same group of guys that have come back now 2 years later. So it is a bit of a different group. The odds are definitely still in San Diego's favor, but look, it's beating a dead horse. These short series can just go any which way.
With that said, what's your pick?
I'll take San Diego in 2.
Yeah, me too. There's what I will say? There's a chance that the Braves can push it to a game 3, because Max Fried was unbelievable on Friday. Unbelievable. Again, that was going up against a Royals team that was looking to win to clinch. So it's not like the Royals, who mathematically were in a great position to clinch, but they didn't have it sewn up just yet. They were trying to win that game. Bobby Witt Jr. was in the lineup. and Max Fried almost had a Maddox. I mean, he got to 8 2/3, and I think he was still under 100 pitches when they pulled him after he gave up a couple. I think it was a walk and a hit, but regardless, Fried will give them a shot. I'll give the Braves a game. I think the Braves will get a game, but I think the Padres are going to win that series in 3.
And we talk about Atlanta running on fumes. They are kind of in the best part of the bracket, if you will, playing in San Diego. And then even if it goes 3, you're going to have Friday to recover. And then you've got a 2-hour bus ride from San Diego up north to LA at Dodger Stadium. So that's going to allow you a little bit more recovery time than someone like the Mets, where, okay, Milwaukee to Philly, it's not that huge of a deal. And then now the trip and the travel from Philly to New York isn't as bad. Same can be said for some of the series in the American League, but definitely the easiest travel schedule has to be that Atlanta, San Diego pocket going to LA, whoever that winner is. So if Atlanta can get through this series, they can slowly start to catch their breath going into the division round.
Yeah, I think there's a world if the Braves can win this one, if Sale can come back for the NLDS, there is a world the Braves can run the table. You never know. Maybe they'll meet the Mets again in the NLCS, and it could be a crazy series. That would be a lot of fun if we got there. I do think the Padres are going to win it for sure. So let's switch to the other one, the other NL wildcard series here. And we just watched it. Mets Brewers. The Mets were in Milwaukee to close their season, got a big victory, flew to Atlanta, got to celebrate, and then flew right on back to Milwaukee. Here's the thing about this series. Because the Mets won game 1 today, their pitching's in pretty good shape. They got Luis Severino. They got Shamanai going game 2. And their bullpen did not get taxed too much today, despite the doubleheader. Joey Lucchesi got called up, minor league pitcher for the Mets, pretty much all year. I think he made a couple spot starts. He gave them 6 innings. Huascar Brazaban and Adam Ottavino covered the other ones. Those are guys that are either going to be left off the roster or they're sort of at the end of the bullpen. I know for a fact Jose Budo and Reed Garrett, guys that can go multiple innings, did not pitch today or yesterday. So the Mets have arrested enough bullpen. They don't have Edwin Diaz for game 1. I would assume he threw 26 pitches on Sunday and 50 plus today. So I think Edwin's probably shot until at least game 2. But the Mets have, in my opinion, maybe a little bit of an edge when it comes to the starting pitching in this series. The Brewers got Freddie Peralta, but I don't know who's starting game 2 or game 3. They've showed us that they can win with their bullpen, but I think the Mets got a real shot here.
If you want to say that the weekend was an indicator of what was going to happen, that doesn't mean the Mets lose this series in 3. It means they get swept in 2, right? Because they lost Friday and Saturday before salvaging a win on Sunday. But you're right. Like, that's so interesting. I don't know that we've ever had, and again, with the 2 games in Atlanta, that changes the Mets' schedule. So they didn't end their season in Milwaukee. But that would be wild to think you end a season against one team and then you play them immediately. So I'm sure we're in some kind of first for 2 teams playing each other that close together in the regular season and then in the postseason. But I think that benefits the hitters more than anything, because when you have a batter who's seen a pitcher multiple times and even has had a modicum of success, even just a little bit, they say to a man that they can just harken back on those memories of the success that they had in the box, and that's beneficial. But if you're a pitcher going against a hitter that's never seen you before, the pitcher has the advantage because you don't know what that arsenal looks like. And good pitching always beats good hitting. Unknown hitting can't defeat unknown pitching. So the advantages to the pitching, except now in this series. So it does become interesting looking at that matchup where, again, the bullpens are a little bit more exposed to both teams, whereas the starting pitching, again, that's really where I think the series comes down to, is the starting pitching, because Milwaukee hasn't seen the Mets guys quite as much. New York hasn't seen the Brewers starters quite as much. And so I think that's where this series is going to ultimately come down to, especially in the case of the Mets, who have, a bullpen a little bit more on gas than Milwaukee does with the extra day off.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think this is the ultimate series to sort of test that theory of rest versus momentum. If the Mets will win, if they come off of winning this game 1 and then they go into the wild card round and they win the first game of this series, I think that'll largely be riding that momentum that they gained from winning in such dramatic fashion. The Brewers have owned the Mets this year, and I don't want to say I'm going into this series completely confident the Mets are going to win, because I did watch Friday, Saturday, and I watched the beginning of the season. And what if you aren't paying attention to the Brewers and you're just seeing the record, what you don't notice is just how athletic they are. At every position, they got a guy that has wheels, and they make incredible plays in the field defensively. They get on base. They're all a threat to run, and they were just running circles around the Mets the first couple games. So that's definitely a big thing to watch in this series, the way the Brewers can manufacture runs. The Mets, the question is, some of those guys that started to hit home runs, Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Lindor, they have Pete Alonso, who has not hit a homer in a minute, Mark Vientos. If the Mets can outslug the Brewers, I think they win this series. But if this just strictly comes down to pitching, defense, speed, bullpen, the Brewers, I think, will win this series.
Yeah, Milwaukee had 11 players this year, or rather 8 players this year with 11 or more home runs, and they had 9 players with 11 or more steals. So Bryce Terang quietly stealing 50 bases for Milwaukee. So, right, they've got that power speed combination. And while this is a largely young group, you got to remember Milwaukee has gone to the postseason 5 of the last 7 years. So there is some, a lot of playoff experience there, especially with guys like Freddie Peralta, still on that roster, and Rhys Hoskins, who I'm sure loves killing the Mets and has quite the track record of doing so, formerly with the Phillies. So I think this is also going to be a series with a lot of juice, and whether Miller Park, formerly Miller Park, now American Family Field, is open or closed. Again, those are going to be different advantages that the Milwaukee's going to have at home, and feeling comfortable knowing, hey, we just handled these guys previously towards the end of the season when we didn't have something to play for. They were giving their best. They were giving their all, and we were still able to take it to them 2 out of 3. Hey, let's go do that exact same thing again. So, again, that advantage is still to Milwaukee, but you're right. The Mets have that momentum after taking the more critical game 1 on Monday in the Atlanta series.
Yeah, I do wonder, Pat Murphy came out and said, we're playing these games hard because they wanted that doubleheader to get played out here. They wanted to see the Mets travel to Atlanta, play 18 innings, come right on back. And now I think that takes, not that there'd be any excuses, but I don't, we had a Twitter Spaces this morning, and I was talking about this series a little bit. And one of the things I said is, at a certain point, the Brewers surprise us every year and they make it. They need to have some playoff success. It's been a long time since they really have made it out of the first round. They had that run in, I think it was 2018, where they were a game away from the World Series. They lost to the Dodgers, but they really haven't had a lot of playoff success since then. And I know a lot of these guys are new faces. Jackson Chourio, Bryce Terang, a lot of these guys have not been key figures for the Brewers for other playoff runs. But as a franchise, you keep getting there. You got to have some playoff success. So I think maybe not to the same degree as the Padres. It's a pretty big disappointment if the Brewers can't secure this series at home against a Mets team that they just handled, that they won 5 of 6 against during the regular season, who should be taxed coming off 18 grueling innings on Monday just to get in.
That's a good point. That in the last four years that Milwaukee went to the postseason, they won 1 game. They lost the wild card game in 2019 and 2020 when there was a wild card round for that 1 year. They got swept in 2 games. They won a game in the division series in 2021. And you're right, in 2023, they lost 2 games against the Diamondbacks. So, Milwaukee is not the fortress that, I think San Diego certainly could be. And with a little bit of the success that the Mets have had, they can just build on that because, as we're saying, look, this is a 3-game series, best of. Anybody can take it. And it's going to come down to starting pitching, and you have to like what the Mets have right now.
So who do you got, Patrick? Mets, Brewers, how many games? What are you thinking?
I think the Mets are going to pull the upset. They're going to take 2 of 3 in Milwaukee and move on to the next round and go ahead and face off with the Phillies. And I think that's what everybody wants to see. That will just be those 2 gigantic monster trucks going head to head. The fan bases are the monster trucks, maybe more so than the teams going head to head. That would be craziness. It's not the NLCS, but still, it's Phillies, Mets in the postseason. That's kind of a rarity that those 2 teams have matched up. They have in the past, but not as much as you might think. It's usually just kept to the regular season. So I think I want to see that happening as well. The Mets taking it in 3 games. How about you?
You took my answer. I think that's where I was going to go to. Obviously, I mean, look behind me. Who would think I'm going to take the Brewers? Come on. But I will say, I think Major League Baseball, kind of like you mentioned, probably wants that as well. If they could have coming into this weekend, Mets versus Phillies, Padres versus Dodgers for the TV dollars, that's the best possible outcome for Major League Baseball, which means it probably won't happen. So who's going to pull off the upsets? Well, I guess in this case, the Mets would be the upset, but we will see how the NL shakes out. I want to switch over to the American League side of things. We alluded to it, so let's get right into that series. Tigers versus the Houston Astros, and AJ Hinch is going to be put right front and center as sort of the guy to talk about going into this series, because you have the former Astros manager that was there for the beginning of the dynasty with an up-and-coming team. And I looked this up, Patrick. I said, let me see when the first time the Astros made the playoffs with AJ Hinch. Do you remember off the top of your head? I'm just curious.
I think they were really bad from 2010 to 2013. So I think they got in 2014, missed in 15, and then we're back in 16.
You almost nailed it. Those are always tricky years for you, 15, 16. You messed those up now.
How dare you?
But they got in 15, AJ Hinch's first year managing. They were not in 16, and then they've been in ever since from 17 on. 17, of course, being the infamous season. But 2015, Houston Astros were very similar to this current Tigers team. Young upstarts. They went 86 and 76, the exact same record the Tigers finished with this year. And funny enough, they had beaten the Yankees in the wild card game at that time. They went into a ALDS against the eventual champions, the Kansas City Royals. 5-game series. The Astros took 2 of the first 3, and the Royals took game 4 and 5. So if you're going to pull off an upset, AJ Hinch now is a 3-game series. Anything can happen. Will the Tigers win 2 of 3 here and knock off the Astros? Are the Tigers the team that finally ends the Astros' reign of getting to the ALCS every single year?
I don't think so. But it's going to be fun to watch. Like, this would probably be the biggest upset. I know we kind of talked about that in previous series, but I think this would be the biggest upset because you have the team with the most postseason experience, player by player, according to the franchise, right? The organization has that playoff experience. Houston has to be at the top of that list. And then Detroit with almost nobody. The players, if you go to their baseball reference page and you look at all the guys who had the most playoff experience with the Tigers, they traded them all away. Andrew Chafin, right? Mark Canha, Jack Flaherty a little bit when he was with St. Louis. Like, all of the guys that had the most experience, they ended up dealing at the deadline. So I think that really bodes well for the Astros. They've got the right manager in AJ Hinch. Say, hey, they're going to try to do this. They're going to try to do that. We'll make sure there's no trash cans in their dugouts so that it's a fair competition. I heard that they used to do that. Weren't you the manager at that time? Next question. Like, let's move on, guys. Let's focus on getting a win here today. So I think that's a wonderful matchup. And I think that actually bodes well in a lot of ways for the Tigers, because now the attention is maybe taken off the players and who are these guys and can they do it? It's really about, can AJ Hinch, their manager, defeat the Houston Astros more than it is the team. And so I think that's a good thing. That's a good shift of narrative for it to be on the manager and maybe take a little weight off the obvious eventual unanimous Cy Young Award winner in Tarek Skubal, who wins the pitching triple crown for the most wins, strikeouts, and ERA. So, that's in their favor, but at the same time, it has to be one of the more lopsided series we've got in the first round.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you are right. The more that you actually break it down, while I think that the Braves would be such a big upset over the Padres just because of how much they've gone through not having Chris Sale, I just don't know who's going to pitch in that series. At the same time, it's the Tigers, and you're going to run out a starting lineup where most of the national audience that's tuning into that game, they're not going to know who Riley Green or Kerry Carpenter is. They're not going to know these names. The one name that they would know is Javi Baez, and his absence is part of why the Tigers have taken off, because they've been better off with Trey Sweeney. Not that his stats have jumped off the page, but I think maybe just not the distraction that Javi Baez can be has just helped the energy in that clubhouse. I wrote an article for us today. When will the Detroit Tigers Cinderella story end? And it does feel like a team that has some magic on their side. believe they're 33-13 over their last 46 games. So they're riding a lot of momentum, and they got the best pitcher in this series. The thing is, the Astros have a guy that is playoff battle tested in Framber Valdez, who I could just as easily see matching Skubal. And, it could go like those two guys, game one. If you want to talk about a pitching matchup, I think that might be the best one we're going to get in this wild card round to start. It could be 8 innings, no runs across the board. And then all of a sudden, Jordan comes up in the ninth with a couple runners on and Skubal's out of the game. All of a sudden, boom, 3-run homer, and Houston has a commanding lead. This is a series where if the Tigers don't win game one, they're not winning. I don't see them getting off the mat. But if they can win game one, they got a shot.
I couldn't agree more. We're going back to Atlanta and San Diego. Atlanta has the more postseason experience, has the better pedigree than San Diego, whereas we don't have that situation here between Houston and Detroit. So it's really so incredibly one-sided. And Detroit, they want to win the series, but if they don't, it's going to be a similar situation to what you just said. Houston, when they finally were on the come up in 2015, it didn't work out for them, but they were able to retool and go back full force in 2017. So the Tigers very well could do the same thing. I think AJ Hinch understands that because it is, a parallel situation to what he had when he first took over that job for Bo Porter in 2015. And so it's like, you know what? This is a learning lesson. This isn't we got to win this game. We're going to learn now, and it's going to plant a seed for 2025, 2026. That's going to help us win that World Series. So it's a learning lesson. It's nothing but positive. It's all, house money, so to speak, for Detroit right now, for a team that a week ago, I think I was still out on. I said, well, the Twins still got that last wild card spot. They got a guy like Carlos Correa who knows how to win big games late in the season. He's going to run out ground balls to end a game. Oops. What did I know? Tigers end up getting in there, and it's not as do or die for Detroit. It's house money, and it's going to be a lot of fun for them. AJ Hinch versus the Astros. That's the narrative, and I think it's going to be the Astros in 2.
Astros in 2 for you. So if the Tigers were squaring off against the Baltimore Orioles, I think I would have taken them. They just went into Baltimore like a weekend ago. I guess 2 weekends ago now, but they just went into Baltimore and took 2 or 3. And I feel like for a young team to draw on that experience where AJ Hinch can say, guys, we just did this. Like, yes, it's going to be a little bit louder. There's going to be some more fans. There's going to be more attention, but we just did this. Let's go do it again. I feel like they would have won that. I think it's going to be Astros in 3. I think that Skubal's going to win game 1, but Houston is going to battle back and take the next 2 games and ensure victory. I think the Tigers are going to make them sweat, though. I think there's going to be, game 1, Tigers win. Maybe game 2, Tigers push them to the brink, and the Astros have a comeback, and then maybe they roll in game 3. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, though. I'm more excited about that series than our final one to preview, but you never know. Maybe that series ends up being the best of the bunch. So let's talk about Royals-Orioles. Now, game 1, pretty nice pitching matchup to sink our teeth into. Cole Reagans versus Corbin Burns. I don't know let's just start on the pitching matchup for which one do you like better? Skubal, Valdez, or Reagans, Burns?
Maybe Reagans, Burns. Burns got that postseason pedigree there. He's done it a lot in Milwaukee, but he got the young up and coming lefty, like the guy that's going to be the next dude. He might have that Tarek Skubal type season in 2025 for the Royals. So I like the right left matchup, getting the different looks on both sides. But you're right. The pitching is extraordinary. We'll get to the superstar status of some of the guys that's going between these two clubs, Royals, Orioles. I like the color scheme matchup, right, with the royal blue against the bright orange. Like, this is going to be vibrant. It's not that orange stuff that we got going on in Houston, which is fine. But nevertheless, I think Royals, Orioles creates a tongue twister for a lot of people as well. So I'm excited for this series. And excited for the pitching matchups. Are we agreeing on everything? Are you also going Reagans versus Burns in game 1 as the better pitching matchup?
I think I'm going to go with the Cy Young. I want to see Skubal getting that start. And Valdez has turned himself into a really good postseason pitcher where I think that's the one I'm a little more excited about, not to mention Severino, Peralta, come on. But no, I think for me, I would say I'm a little more keyed into that first game. I just love the underdog story too. I have hopped on the Tigers bandwagon over the last like 3 weeks, and I've been completely bought into what they're doing. So that's sort of my American League team that I'm a little bit of a fan of right now. But there's that storyline for who's better baseball that we just can't ignore here, which is Bobby Witt Jr., Gunnar Henderson, big stage. I mean, Bobby won the season, but can Gunnar win the series, right? Couple big home runs. All of a sudden, we open up a dialogue again. Who's the better postseason performer? That's going to be a lot of fun to watch as well.
They said we wouldn't last, and yet the script we submitted was the one that they chose. Bobby Baseball versus Gunnar. Yeah, that's just going to be such an exciting matchup for more likely the runner-up in the MVP voting for the American League. Maybe third place, Gunnar Henderson. We'll see where he winds up. But yeah, the future of the American League on full display between these two shortstops that are going to be around for a very long time. And again, one bats from the right-hand side, one bats from the left-hand side. One's got a lot more speed than the other. So Bobby Witt Jr. will be one of the better parts of this postseason and the first round is America really getting to see Bobby Witt Jr. on full display, because we don't always get to see the young players in big spots like these, or the best players in the game don't always make the postseason. And if you were to run down the list of the top 10 most exciting players in the game, I think we've got most of them. Ellie De La Cruz, too bad, so sad. Paul Skeens. But we've got two of the best, most exciting young players right now in Baltimore, and Bobby Witt Jr. versus Gunnar Henderson. And, as baseball fans, we're very lucky for that matchup.
We are, for sure. And I think it really has to come down to that matchup for the Royals to win, because their offense is so dependent on Bobby Witt Jr. So he's got to be the MVP in this series. He's got to be the one that really lifts them up. I think Salvador Perez obviously has the postseason experience to draw on. He's clearly the leader that they're going to turn to. But when it comes to the play on the field, Bobby Witt's going to set the tone for the Royals. And I don't know. It's going to be an interesting matchup to kind of get in beyond that. I don't really know who else is going to go here for the Orioles. The Royals have announced their pitchers. They're going Reagans, Lugo, and then apparently Michael Wacha for a potential game 3. My assumption would be Eflin if he's ready to go and pitch a game 2 for the Orioles. And then beyond that, I don't know who exactly they're going to go to. Do the Royals have the pitching edge, at least on the starting front? And even the bullpens, I don't even know if the Orioles have the best bullpen coming in here. So do we give the edge pitching-wise to the Royals, and maybe the Orioles have the clear edge offensively?
I would over the weekend, and talking about all the crazy playoff scenarios, there was a lot of praise going around for Michael Wacha as one of those guys who was integral in really helping lift the Royals go from that 106 loss team in 2023 to where they're at right now. And, for him getting that ball in game 3 and what could be the game that decides their season, they're going to rally behind the guy that's been that leader, been that guy that's, he's danced around to a bunch of different teams over the last few years, and yet here he is at the forefront leading the rotation in this way, despite the stats maybe not backing that up as him being the ace. He's not the ace, but he might be the most valuable guy, at least in the clubhouse. And in this series, I think if you look at all of the wild card round matchups, I think the Baltimore Orioles, head and shoulders above any team out there, has the most pressure on them. The Brewers, again, okay, they're there and no one expected it in a lot of different ways, but they're really good. They did. They at least won their division. But the Orioles are supposed to be this team where now is their time. Last year was kind of their time too, a little bit early. But hey, you know what? That's okay. This was our first bite at the apple. Now they're really expected to go deep into the playoffs, for the next 2, 3, maybe even 4 years as part of this dynasty that they've built up. That's part of the whole benefit of tanking, is that you get a bunch of guys together at the same time so that your window of contention isn't just 1 year. It's really more like 3 or 4 years. And now they're in the middle of it. They're in the heart of it. They're expected to win and go on. And after failing to win the AL East, they need to win this first round matchup. And it's not going to be easy going against the upstart Kansas City Royals.
It's not. It's really interesting that you put it that way. And honestly, I was thinking in my head, like, would they be the team that has that most pressure? And I think I still lean a little bit towards the Padres, because that's definitely a team that was built for this year, maybe has a little bit of a shorter lifespan potentially than the Orioles. But then I thought about their game one starter. How many more years are you going to have Corbin Burnes? Is this it? Is it one and done? Is he going to sign with another team? And all indications sort of seem like they might not pony up to sign him to that massive contract that he has earned in free agency coming up here. So I think with that in mind, there really is a lot of pressure because you have the guy that you want to lead you there. You got to get it done now, especially if Burnes does win you a game one. You can't drop the next two. You got to get beyond that, which leads me to ask this question. As we look ahead, things have set up pretty interestingly where we could get Orioles-Yankees in the next round. Other side of it, it's Guardians waiting for the winner of Astros-Tigers. I guess technically you have another potential division rivalry with the Tigers and the Guardians, although I think the Astros might win that series. Yankees-Orioles. If you get Yankees-Orioles, Mets-Phillies, Dodgers-Padres, then it really is a division series, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be exciting. That's almost how you'd love to draw it up. And I think most seasons it's almost impossible for something like that to happen. So that would just be really exciting. And going back to what we were talking about with the pressure being on Baltimore, how many games has this roster won in October? The answer is none, because they got
0.
swept. They got swept by the Texas Rangers. So again, you want to talk about pressure being on any one particular team. The pressure on the Padres was this season. Yeah, there's a pressure to win a World Series and to do it for Peter Seidler, but they've kind of already passed that first hurdle, right? It's the hurdle that's in front of you. I think that's the most important one, and that might be most indicative of how much success you're going to have. So I think the Padres already have that momentum of, hey, look, we've got this roster of superstars around us, but we can't figure it out for the regular season. We've got to figure it out now. And we've got a manager that has a little bit more of that postseason success from his time in St. Louis in Mike Schilt. And, Baltimore stuck with Brandon Hyde. The fact that he was at the helm for at least 2 100-loss seasons. I think he was there for 3 of the different 100-loss seasons. They just weren't 3 consecutive. I think that was 18, 19, and then 2021. In the pandemic season, they weren't. They didn't have a 100-loss winning percentage even. But that being said, like Baltimore has that pressure on them, I think, to go out and win. That pressure is there for every team to do that, but that's their hurdle right now. And I would say that they haven't really gotten past any hurdles yet. They arrived early in 2023, but then they lost in that first round to the Rangers, where, at least the Padres got past the hurdle of, making the postseason and even challenging the Dodgers for the NL West title. So I think they're feeling good in that way. And there just isn't just that same dynamic. That's just me.
Yeah, no, it's going to be really interesting to see if the Orioles can rise to the moment here, because the Royals, if they get bounced, okay, great. Start of a new era. You're going to still have Lugo back next year, Reagans, Bobby Witt Jr. Like they've already achieved. They've done it. They made the playoffs. The Orioles, yeah, they're supposed to be, they were supposed to be the favorites going into this season in the American League. And they were supposed to win that division again. Obviously, it was going to be them or the Yankees. That sort of was definitely from the beginning, a kind of head-to-head that we thought was going to play out all year. But they dropped the ball at the end, and they could have won that division. So now you can make it all go away in October. It's going to be a lot of fun, man. We got 4 games. That's the wild card round comes at you quick. Okay, it's here and it's over in a flash. Going to start off with that AJ Hinch showdown, the Tigers-Astros at 2:30 Eastern, 4 o'clock Eastern, Royals-Orioles, Mets-Brewers, 5:30 Eastern, and then closing it out, Braves-Padres, 8:30. That'll be game 1. Game 2 will be played on Wednesday, game 3 on Thursday if they're necessary. And you and I will probably be back on Friday, potentially, if we can line things up, to do the same thing to preview the next round of the division series. So thank you all for tuning into the stream for a little late night baseball action. Appreciate all of you who've been checking out our show throughout the season. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. Check out all the written work we got coming at justbaseball.com, and also follow us on social media at Who's Better BB. We'll be back in a couple days for another stream talking about who's better in baseball.